Right, the second of the main additions I've done to the game is an environmental hazard called an asteroid. Um, the asteroid, and if we compile it a few times, I'll go into later, is basically a randomly generated object, and if I compile it, each time you see that it creates a new instance of the object. From the point of view of how that works, we have a construction script that basically takes an element, which is a rock from another one of the uh, Unreal tutorial games, and then randomly uses multiple instances of this, in this case between 16 and 24 rocks, and it will, for each of those particular rocks, change the distance and scale and rotation of that particular rock from the center of the unit itself, so its initial sphere. So you'll get multiple rocks that are basically stuck at all various angles around that, and to each of those it applies that particular mesh. And then once we've created the whole object, the second phase of it does a random generation of a spin. So what we see in the game, the asteroids come through, are randomly shaped asteroids that all have randomly shaped motion, so that it generates quite a bit of variety, I guess probably uniqueness of these particular objects in the game. How they then work, the second part is then the construction is that for each of them we need to set up a velocity, and the way it does that is it just finds out where it is on the game. It's set up so that all asteroids will essentially pass through the game just above the health and ammo sliders, so that we don't generate an asteroid and it goes off somewhere else outside the game. But it does mean that as they come over the normal area where the player ship will be, it'll be a random series of vectors that they come in on, as in the angle of approach and the point across that bottom axis where they'll pass. So a lot of these other things are really just randomness. So we, depending on the size, we will do some things to determine whether it'll be a bit faster or a bit slower. Mainly so that we don't end up with too many coming through at the same period. If that makes sense. From the event itself, the asteroid movement is really a factor from where it started and getting through to the point where it's likely to hit a player ship, and we do a check that then says, well, once it's gone off the bottom of the screen, we need to get rid of it. The collision process itself, rather than any of the spheres, it is the sum of the instances of the meshes, so that if visually a craft hits any of the mesh instances of the asteroid, that will cause the collision, rather than having a sphere, which means that sometimes it looks as though the craft is exploding, even though no visual contact has been made. But the process then is just really going through and determining what sort of enemy have we collided with, and then calling its replacement function. So this goes back to the actual logic of the different units themselves. So if I destroy a drone, I need to replace it and then explode it. They're different functions because, for variety reasons, the rules behind spawning different units vary, and the explosions for different units take different colors. So at the asteroid level, basically that is handling its creation, its movement, and its collision with the non-player actors. In terms of then collision with the player actors and how they are spawned, that activity takes place within the player ship itself. And where we have here is a process of starting the asteroids. Now, the asteroids themselves, from a game perspective, live in this hypothetical arc around the center of the game, which is why you'll see bits of trigonometry in place. So they are within a standard distance of the player ship to start with, but they will spawn in an arc sort of from -60 to +60 degrees, and we do our trigonometry here to then come up with a location for where they start. This then feeds into the velocity that we saw earlier, so depending on where in the arc a particular asteroid has been spawned, it will then have to have a different velocity and direction vector in order to come into the screen of play that we want. There's still quite a lot of debugging information in here because it's the last thing I did, but essentially it will call this procedure just after the game starts, so we get the first one going, and as they disappear, it basically creates new events to keep spawning the asteroids, other than in the condition where the player is using the static charge, and I decided to then switch it off during that time because having asteroids coming through blowing up the contagion kind of lost some of the visual impact of the contagion.